Good evening or late afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another program of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. You're very welcome. The call-in number for those of you interested is 640-3091. As ever, I'd be very happy to welcome your call if there's something you'd like to get off your chest. Please feel free to call 640-3091. It is Tuesday, the 20th of November. If you're watching this live at 6 o'clock, then welcome. The program is repeated at other times, so let me start by wishing everybody a very, very happy Thanksgiving. And I think that all of us have things to be thankful for, and it behooves us at this time of the year, I think, to stop, find a quiet space or a quiet time, and to give thanks for all the blessings that we do have, and we all have them, even in our even when things are not all going perfectly. In the city of Manchester, that goes for our school district as much as everything else. I've said to many people over the years that it's a difficult position to be in as somebody who is a strong advocate for schools, for students, for families, for teachers, and for great public schools as being maybe the ultimate public good, but certainly a very important public good. And as those of you who know me will know, it is my contention that the most powerful way and the most cost-effective way that we can affect the future well-being of individuals, of our city, of our community, and of the state is by investing in education. So therefore, those who don't want to do it, I think they do themselves a disservice. It's not about the immediate, my kids are out of school, my grandkids don't live here anymore, I don't have children, whatever that rationale might be. As a member of the Manchester community, and even for that matter of the greater Manchester community, seeing that our schools get what they need and are properly funded is really self-serving. It helps us all. But my dilemma has always been and continues to be the fact that I want to be able to talk about the shortages, the places where our school district is not doing that which it should, the problems, and particularly when they become egregious and serious. I want to be able to talk about those while at the same time recognizing, and in this case being thankful for all the wonderful things happening in our district. And when you go into any school, it's heartwarming to walk into a school and see kids at whatever age. I guess the younger they are, the cuter they are, perhaps. But when one sees, little kids in elementary school happily working in their classrooms, kids playing, middle schoolers doing their thing and their science projects and their displays and the other things that they're so proud of, it's just a wonderful thing. And a lot of people, I think, who don't take the time to look more deeply often develop their views about schools and what goes on in them based on some set of ideas that are out there in the blogosphere, or what they see on social media, or sometimes one hears views that were true 20, 30, 40 years ago that may not be true today. The good news is that despite all the challenges in our school district, and believe me, there are serious challenges, there are wonderful things going on in our schools. And I know this past weekend there were schools had plays on. That a lot of that happens, and concerts are coming up next week. If you go on the Manchester School District website, you'll find quite a few of them in the calendar. You may have to go to the individual schools. Oftentimes, when you go on the Manchester School District website, which is going through a metamorphosis, they're updating it and changing it as we speak. But oftentimes, stuff in the calendar doesn't in any sense represent the totality of what's going on in the district. So you can, through the website, you can go to schools. If you click on schools, you can click on either elementary schools or middle schools or high schools. And once you get there, you can click on your individual school. And oftentimes, when you get to that point, it's there that you see the great things that are happening. And so. It's just a wonderful thing, and we do have a lot to be thankful for. Let me just grab a caller here. Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Good evening, Jim. I'm just listening to you. I've been listening to you through the years, and I wanted to try to speak to you about the funding issue I know we have with the schools, and I think one of the big things is we see around the country with the legalization of marijuana coming forth, and the tax benefits of it. I think we're going to be able to settle a lot of these issues with the government needs for revenue for education and for municipal contracts and stuff with the taxes that we're going to see from the marijuana, because it's in Massachusetts. I just see it a matter of time, and I know it's starting to take focus at the State House. And like our liquor, and sweepstakes, I think, if it's the bills are written properly, we could benefit the schools, the local schools, and the local government positions could be fulfilled at their contracts. And I just, like I said, I'm really excited on that behalf of the legalization of marijuana, and just wanted to make my point clear.
Well, I
appreciate
the call. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So we haven't had that in New Hampshire yet, but I guess it may well be on the way. I think my first point when it comes to, again, I appreciate the call. My first point about education is that in the city of Manchester, and I'm sorry if it sort of people's eyes and ears close at the thought of it, but the fact is we spend less on education per student than anybody else in the state. I don't want to keep on about it. For those of you who listen regularly will know, it's just true. And so, and we have the largest number of kids per as a result, we have the largest number of kids per teacher in the state. And there are lots of programs that we don't have that our kids ought to have, and particularly for those kids most in need. And so, So my first, as this argument is sort of constructed, or if one were to debate this, what I've sought to do, and I'm glad the caller called in this regard, what I've sought to do for a long time is to have a recognition that we simply have not put the money into our public schools that we have needed to. And that because since we're spending less than everybody else, we're spending less than the national average, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. As a percentage of total expenditures, our spending is off. You can use almost any measure to measure the spending on public schools in Manchester to demonstrate that it is short of where it ought to be. And so I would love to get to the point where we could have agreement on that simple, I consider low-hanging fruit. It should be easy to agree that. And once you get to there, then the question becomes for taxpayers in the city of Manchester, the issue becomes, well, okay, we have a problem, how do we solve it? And that's where things like the legalization of marijuana, the Keno gambling thing, the liquor stores, the rooms and meals tax, and etc. Whatever it is that can be used in order to fill these deficits, that would be a lovely debate, a great debate to have. Now, in particular, with regard to the marijuana issue, I have to admit, being a guy of my age, my thoughts on this topic have like many things, have changed over time. So that would have seemed like not a great idea many years ago. I did spend some time in Amsterdam back in the 80s, and without visiting all of that fun time, back then marijuana was not illegal in Amsterdam, and I don't want to sort of go off on that topic other than to say that the world didn't end. It actually did have the benefits of removing the incentive for people for criminals to be involved in that. Why would one stand on a street corner selling marijuana when anybody could go in a store and acquire it? So. But my reticence about it with regard to New Hampshire is I have to say that if a gun were put to my head, so to speak, and there were no other choices, then I would accept if money was going to be taken from there and found to put to education purposes, then it's not like I would object to that. I just have questions remaining about the marijuana thing. I listen to what police officers have to say. Let me just say that generally speaking, I'm no libertarian. I believe in the public good. I believe that government has a function and role in our lives, and that role should be to provide rails or guidelines so that we have a level playing field and equal opportunity, etc., things like that. But having said that, I also believe in individual liberty and individual choice, and insofar as it is possible, then the government shouldn't be in the business of prohibiting things unless it has a good purpose to it. It seems strange to me that the construct in New Hampshire is that as a business person, if I were a business person, I couldn't go and I can't go down the street and open a liquor store. Perhaps I'm a really good liquor store seller person. Perhaps I've got very good ideas. Perhaps I'd have a wider selection. Perhaps I'd open longer hours. Perhaps I'd be more responsible. I don't know. But the idea that the state decides that in this case we're going to reserve this unto ourselves, it seems a very strange function of government. And if you hadn't grown up in New Hampshire and been used to that idea, then you would find it strange that for instance, why is it that the state of New Hampshire isn't the only source of cigarettes? It could just as easily have been so. I dislike the Keno thing. I'm grateful for it. If this sounds a little complicated, I know, but because there's no other source of funding, we have to use this ridiculous New Hampshire method of finding money under every stone. For me, it's all an excuse not to actually fund things properly and to have a much fairer taxation system than we have today. The idea that, I know it's the third rail in New Hampshire politics, and people can't, you touch it and you die, so to speak. But in my case, I have no problem with saying that I think what 48 of the other 50 states do in having a broad-based tax is entirely defendable and preferable to a system where property owners get hammered, whether they have high income or low income or no income. And people have to sell their houses. Families who've lived in a home their whole lives have to abandon it when they get to a certain point in their careers, that once one hits retirement you have to sell the family home up. There is no tradition, therefore, of family homes being passed on from generation to generation. It affects neighbourhoods and townlands and properties everywhere because of this onerous burden of property taxes. So I'm no fan of property taxes. I think that a broad-based tax would be much preferable. Now, people again can argue about what that might be, whether it's a sales tax, whether it's a flat tax, whether it's an income tax. Let's have that discussion. But I think it's much fairer that people pay according to their means, or on one side, when it comes to income tax, or pay according to that which they use, which would be a sales tax. But in any case, I've got a choice when it comes to sales tax. If I want to buy a $30,000 yacht and I'm paying 10% on it, then then that's what I have to pay, and or 5% or whatever it may be. And if I'm the kind of guy who has a little sailboat and I buy it for $800, then I spend it on that. But so the idea, sir, the answer to your call is yes. I would not. You wouldn't find me campaigning on the streets to stop revenues from the legalization of marijuana being used for education. On the contrary, I would welcome it. But I have to say that to me, that would be a terrible reason for doing it in the first place. I think the big question that I have heard, it's not a thing that I've spent any time studying, the big questions that I hear about the legalization of marijuana, I like the idea about the removal of the criminal incentive. I think that's a strong point. Obviously, state revenues from taxes on such products it would be a good thing. I worry about what the police say around intoxicated drivers and the effect on intoxicated drivers. And there's been some comments that I've read, and I don't know how truthful they are, etc. But there've been some comments about out in Colorado where this happened, that the incidence of impaired driving had increased. But I don't know if that's true. I just worry about how do you control for people who might be high, for want of a word, being impaired and driving. And I understand the issues about drink driving and alcohol having its terrible deficits and problems too. So I don't know the easy answer, but that's my response. Another point I would make to the caller is this: is that we have right now in the state of New Hampshire, Governor Sununu was proud to boast during the recent election that we have a surplus in the state of New Hampshire, and I find it. This is not. I'll pick another subject in another time to go after Governor Chris Sununu on something, but I have to tell you that it makes no sense to me that we have a surplus in the state of New Hampshire. That's after all the cuts we've done. Of course, we've cut and cut and cut and cut. So the fact that we have many people in need of mental health services who can't get them, who end up spending days, sometimes weeks, in an emergency room in a hospital. Can anybody imagine, even if you were sane? I don't mean that as a negative comment, but if you were entirely rational and sane and not having issues of whatever they may be, schizophrenia or paranoia or depression or whatever it may be, if you had none of those things and you went over to the Elliott Hospital or to CMC tonight and they kept you there, and I don't know how many of you've ever spent any time in an emergency room, hopefully not too much, but all of us, I think, end up there at some point one way or another. There's nothing pleasurable about it. It's not relaxed. It's not conducive to, calmness and etc. It's an emergency room. And the idea that we in New Hampshire, because we refuse to spend the money needed on our mental health needs, we're notorious for this, right? Our surrounding states suffer from this. Massachusetts has a problem with New Hampshire residents seeking help in the state of Massachusetts because they go south of the border because of the lack of facilities and et cetera here. It seems crazy to me that while that's going on, that we have a surplus. It seems crazy to me that while we have the issues going on with children in DCYF and Department of Health and Human Services care, where we have children who are social workers with massive caseloads, a foster care system that's breaking. There was some additional funding given for foster care last year. They increased the daily stipend by some tens of cents. It makes no sense when you've got substitute teachers that can't be gotten in this environment. We're paying them $70. It makes no sense. The list could go on and on and on. We have 60% of bridges in the state of New Hampshire in need of repair. A significant number of them are bordering dangerous. We have some bridges that have been closed, and some have been closed for a long time. If you go out into the backwoods of New Hampshire, you'll find closed bridges and then there are red line bridges, and we have all kinds of infrastructure issues that are not funded, and we have a surplus. And so the thought that suddenly that if we had, pick your number, 50 million a year, 100 million a year, whatever it is, coming in from marijuana taxation revenues, that the state of New Hampshire would actually take a different view and perhaps spend some of it on education. I only wish they would do that. Remember, it's not that long ago, 6 years ago, when the state of New Hampshire, Mr. O'Brien, Bill O'Brien's, I would consider it a notorious couple of years or 4 years, when a decision was taken in New Hampshire to lower the taxes on cigarettes. So we actually gave an indirect benefit to Philip Morris and the millionaire investors in that company. By reducing taxes on cigarettes in the state of New Hampshire, we reduced the amount of money available for all the services I just mentioned, reduced the amount of money available for education, but we gave a gift to the tobacco companies. For what reason? Political ideology and self benefit. It should be no surprise that when New Hampshire legislators went down to Washington D.C. and were wined and dined by the tobacco companies, that just guess, 6 months later it's decided that we're going to lower taxes on cigarettes. Now, God bless my friends those the 14% of people in America who still smoke. It's a terrible habit. I was addicted to cigarettes once. I know exactly the pleasures and the terribleness at the same time of cigarettes. It makes no sense. I don't see any argument one could make for lowering the taxes on cigarettes, and especially in a state like New Hampshire that doesn't have the funding for the things it needs. And it makes no sense either that we're sitting on a surplus. When another thing we haven't mentioned, we look at in education, look at our universities. We've got the most expensive college system in the United States for state universities, the most expensive in-state tuition. We have young people. We have a problem in this state with a declining, with an aging population. We have the oldest population of the 50 United States, and that problem is not improving. And we also have the most expensive universities in the United States for in-state tuition. We send our young people from our schools here in Manchester, like MST and West and Memorial and Central. They depart here in trains and planes and U-Hauls every September or late August, and they head off to universities and colleges around the country because of the cost, because it's cheaper to do that than stay in the state of New Hampshire. Our children who do stay in the state of New Hampshire have got the highest amount of student debt of any set of students in the United States. Now, if we could just take a breath here a minute and think about who we are. We are the great state of New Hampshire. We are in the New England region of the United States. We are not a poverty-stricken state. On a per capita basis, income per household basis, we are the 5th, 6th, 7th richest state in the United States of America. So the fact that despite the fact that we are not a poor state, we still manage to have the most expensive public university system in the United States, the highest level of student debt in the United States, the oldest population in the United States, all because of this thing in the ether in the United States, is in the state of New Hampshire, which is that All spending is bad. We won't spend it. We will sit here and we'll sweat the asset, and we'll just allow things to deteriorate around us, and we're just not going. We're just not going to do it. I have no doubt in my mind, ladies and gentlemen, that had the federal government required state passage and approval of the interstate system in 1959. Or in the 1950s under the Eisenhower administration, that the state of New Hampshire would have likely said no, thank you very much, and we'd still have a single lane road going from Keene to Hampton Beach, and from Berlin or Concord down to Boston. At some point, communities need to invest in their futures. We need to be investing in the future of the state of New Hampshire, and the first place we need to invest is in education. And as I've said many times, as the city of Manchester goes, so goes the region. Certainly southern New Hampshire, and also the state, which is why I have said many times that this idea that one can put a ring around Manchester. And people, many of our former members of political operatives in the city of Manchester and public representatives in the city of Manchester who pack up their bags after they're doing their stint here of making sure that nothing gets funded in the city of Manchester, and then when the time comes when they want services, what do? They head out to Bedford, or they go to some other town, or they head over to Rye, and they buy their house there, and they're grand, because you know what? Because the plebs back in Manchester are they don't have to worry about them, because they're living high on the hog, high on the hill, someplace else. And I'm not one for class warfare or anything, ladies and gentlemen, but I have to tell you, it should be appalling to people that you have public representatives in Manchester who will refuse to send their kids to public schools. Why? If you've been part of the decisions, if you're on those boards, and it is clearly an indictment of our public school system when you as a school board member decide to take your kids and send them off to some private school. Especially if you've been somebody who's spent your time in public office arguing for the fact that we don't need to spend any more money in Manchester, our teachers get paid enough, our paraprofessionals are getting paid enough, our substitute teachers are getting paid enough. We could take the Betsy DeVos attitude. Betsy DeVos, though, I don't know if I was looking tonight to see if I could attribute the actual quote from her about teacher pay to herself, but on Snopes, a site for proving whether things are truthful or not, and ascertaining the truth of them. I did get to the point that a group, an endowment, an organisation that she is a principal of, has expressed the view that our teachers, and talking nationally, are overpaid, etc. But people who have these views, and then they have a baby, and the child gets to be 3, and they're like, oh, I live in Manchester, and I've stopped the schools getting a dime for the last 5 years. I'm out of here. Bye. It's simply not good enough. But again, thank you to our caller. It's a good call. I would hope that we could reach consensus on the fact that we need to find revenue sources so that we can put the money into our schools. And I would just like to say this also, that I keep hearing people repeat on social media and in the corner of bars and on street corners and in supermarkets, and I hear people who are wholly ignorant of the facts. They live in a fact-free environment. It's not based on truth and reality, etc. And they will say things like, our public school system is not working. We need to try other things. We've given it a shot. It's not working right. So therefore, it's time we brought in private enterprise to do it, and all this nonsense. The first fact, the reason why it's nonsense is because we didn't give it its shot. We haven't put money into it. I heard someone the other day say that, talk about the Manchester public school system, and he said, he said, in recent years we've put great concentration on STEAM, and STEAM, which of course is a construct of former Mayor Gatz's, which is, a nonsensical term. It's actually an 18th, 19th century term, and I think about Purnell and steam engines and Stevenson and the rocket. I think about steam as train engines heading west across the plains with cow barriers on the front of them. But in any case, this person said that we have spent our resources and our time and energy on STEM in Manchester over recent years, and now we need to look at other things. And I'm like, time out here. Hang on a second. We didn't spend dime one. What are you talking about? We haven't had a technology director in the district for 2 years. We haven't spent. We haven't spent money on laptops, on notebooks, we've thrown pennies at it here and there. We haven't had a STEM program. We haven't invested in STEM. We haven't invested in robust new science labs at MST and West and Memorial and Central, let alone our middle schools or, God forbid, our elementary schools. You go into one of our elementary schools and show me the room with the test tubes and the technology and the chemistry experiments and the physics labs and show me that. There's none of it. It drives me nuts to listen to this stuff. We opened a program at West, run by former Mayor Baines and funded by private parties, and it sits there, and I don't want to say anything negative about it. I'm just saying it was more political than it was reality. Now I know some people may push back on that, but the needs for it all there, the needs for the city were clear. The city needs to invest in science, technology, engineering, and maths. That's what it needs to do. But what we do, of course, is find the postage stamp answer. Let's get some company in, and they're going to give us 5,000, and we're going to get 2,000 from this other company, and we'll get 4 tables and 2 chairs and 1 camera, and we'll put it all together, and we'll call it a program, and woohoo, the Manchester solution to the problem. So it just annoys me that we hear this. I want to get on to a couple of other things. First of all, just with regard to this weekend, Thanksgiving, a Manchester institution, the Turkey Bowl, which is the football game that's usually played around 10 o'clock on the morning of Thanksgiving. And there's an old tradition, people go to the Sweeney Post for breakfast and perhaps an aperitif before the game, and then and people go to other places too. I once found myself in the Wild Rover early one Thanksgiving morning. But let me tell you that the game is going to be on tomorrow night, Wednesday night. So that's Wednesday the 21st at let me see if I have it here. It's on tomorrow at 6 p.m. So the game is the game on Thursday morning, Thanksgiving morning, is cancelled. If you go to Gill Stadium, there'll be nobody there but you. The game is on tomorrow night at 6 p.m. and that's because the weather is going to be extremely cold on Thanksgiving Day. So I don't know. They'll hardly be doing breakfast at the Sweeney Post, but it should be a good time. This year, it's going to be. Trinity High School is going to be playing there and against Central, and I have to tell you that it's great to see Trinity High School back in the fray. They did really well this year. I don't have the details right in front of me, but Trinity High School football did well this year, and it's great to see them back playing. Last year they didn't have enough students. Very sadly, there weren't enough kids go out to play football, and I worried last year that might be the end maybe for Trinity football after all these years. But no, they're back and they're playing the Little Green on tomorrow afternoon at 6 o'clock. So So that's good. Also, right after this program tonight, I'm going to be heading out to the back room where Central Pride Foundation is, Central Boosters, I think, is having a fundraiser. So if you want to combine having a drink and a chat with some friends from around the Central area, that starts, I think, at 6:30, right around now. I'll be there at 7. Another issue that I want to touch off during this program is there were a couple of controversial things that happened recently in the city that I'd like to touch off of. One of them was after the school board meeting the other night, and I have to say school board meetings get more and more. I sometimes at the end of them wish I could get some of those hours of my life back. I really think, with all due respect to everybody on that school board, that people need to take some cognizance of themselves, some self-awareness. And I'm actually grateful to some of the people who say nothing or have very little to say. Now, that's a change for me, because before I used to think, you're sitting there, you've got to vote, you're a school board member, why don't you say something? I've kind of changed to being grateful to them quite often, because there are like two possibilities. First of all, is that they have nothing to say, that they're sort of unthinking and absent the fray. And of course, that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes they don't need to prattle on for 20 minutes. I find the need that for some members of the school board, when I listen to these, a 10-minute spiel of platitudes and circular conversations, and asking and then answering their own question, and ending up with some sort of statement, and at the end of all that, you're like, what was that? Why, please. The other thing that drives me nuts at school board meetings is that people don't do their homework. I have to say, with all due respects to Mayor Joyce Craig, if I ever were mayor and had the gavel at that meeting, I would really, really, really put a stop to all of this stuff. I would call people out when they ask a question that the other 13 members know the answer to, and that they haven't. It's clear that they just are uninformed and haven't informed themselves. I would say, look, take this offline, go ask your neighbor, because we're going to move on to the next topic. Or, Mr. Jones, the next time you come to a school board meeting, please be prepared. Or my favorite pet peeve is when a school board member decides to ask the superintendent a question at the school board meeting that he hasn't asked him during the week, that he hasn't asked the school principal about, that he hasn't sent an email to somebody on, but he or she decides that they want to take up the time of the meeting having this investigative conversation around things that could easily be dealt with. The school board meeting ought to be an executive session that members of the public can go to or can log in and watch on TV and see an executive session going on where a proposal is brought up or an item is brought up. It is debated. There's a proposal either accepted or defeated, and a vote is taken, and people moved on. And the debate is an informed one by people who've done their homework. And then on to the next topic. But we have this interminable discussions that go on and on and on. Now, something that happened after I left, I stayed till the 10 o'clock hour or so at the meeting last week, and then they were going into non-public session for personnel or other matters. Apparently, a discussion ensued after that. It was decided to bring to the floor or at least a discussion was had, and I didn't see it, so I don't know. I only know what was reported in the Union Leader, that there was a proposal to change the contract for the superintendent, Dr. Vargas, from his existing 2-year contract to make it a 5-year contract, and that such a contract that in future all other superintendents would be offered a 5-year contract. Now, I have to say I have some sympathy for the view of offering a 5-year contract, because I can see that that perhaps to attract top talent and to ensure that people would be invested and stay in the community, that offering a longer-term contract might have its benefits. However, I think it's a problem to tie the hands of school boards into the future. This current school board has about a year left in its of its 2-year term. And so if they were to sign a 5-year contract with Dr. Vargas, that would mean that the school board that will replace them will be stuck with Dr. And I admire Dr. Vargas. I have nothing against Dr. Vargas, but that incoming school board would inherit him with all his pluses and or minuses. And not just that, but the school board after them again. And as a point was made during the debate, with a salary of $165,000, $170,000 a year, if you had to buy out a 5-year contract after the end of year one, that would be 4 times $170,000, which is $680,000, $700,000 worth of contract. So I think that's a problem. But the bigger problem, as was pointed out by Committeeman Scannell and our School of Board member Scannell, and I appreciate he happens to be representing my ward in Ward 2, but David Scannell objected to the fact that he said that this discussion should have been on the agenda and that it should have been discussed in public session and not brought up during non-public session. This was brought up late into the night at midnight or so when everybody was gone and local TV was no longer operating, and it smelled bad, like the idea of having it slide under the radar. And I think he was perfectly right. And I find myself in 100% agreement with the editorial of the union leader, which also called this out and complimented school board member Scannell for having drawn attention to the fact that this decision that would have a major financial impact on the city of Manchester should have been put on the agenda in advance. There's no reason to hurry it. There's no reason to, be hiding in the dark and having these conversations. I worry. I think school board members, and I do respect most of them, it's a school board, and I certainly respect the board. School board members need to take a slightly different view. They need a big mirror to look in and say to themselves, I am not a special person with special authority and special insight and special knowledge. I am a representative of the taxpayers of Manchester, here to do what I can to vote in the interests of the public schools of the city of Manchester. Now, we know some school board members don't believe in that. They think they're there to do other things. Some of them are clearly there because they dislike public schools, but that's a mystery and another Gordian knot that we'll try to undo someday. But I heard it shocked me the other day to be told by a principal in one of our schools, when an issue came up about the behaviour of a school board member whose behaviour was questionable, and the principal said to me, "But my problem is that person is my boss, and I've got to be careful what I say because that person's my boss." And I'm like, time out, man. Cool your. What do you mean? You think that school board member X, Y, or Z is your boss? No. We, the taxpayers, we're your boss. The parents are your boss. Oh, and in actual fact, your actual boss is the superintendent. You work for the administration. You work for the city of Manchester. You do not work for a public representative who was elected 12 months ago, who may or may not be re-elected in 12 months from now, whose only role is there in a policy and advising capacity on the school board. That person has no authority over you as a principal, and it frightened me to hear a principal of a school in the city of Manchester tell me that he didn't feel empowered enough to talk back to a school board member who was behaving inappropriately because that was his boss. I was shocked by that, and more on that later as the story develops. And then that brings me nicely and segues into another episode that came up at the last school board meeting. And this one blew me away, actually. There was a comment made during public public during the public commentary, so a person went up and said, inform the school board during their 3-minute chat talk, inform the school board that a member of the board had used the city, the school district's web server to search for the name of a student in one of our high schools, and then had sent an email to said student. That was dropped, I thought, like a bomb in the middle of public session, and nothing was heard until later in the meeting. Of course, the way the format is, people speak in public forum, and then people never address an individual, or they shouldn't. They should address things through the chair, maintaining proper decorum and observing the rules. And then, and vice versa, school board members are not allowed to respond to the comments of members of the public, not directly. What they can do is, once we get to once we get to new business or comments from the school board, then perhaps school board members can say something. So when we got to that period of the meeting, a proposal was made by. A comment was made by school board member Scannell, and a proposal was made that the whole issue, there was a question and talk about how are school board members entitled to see and to seek out the emails of individual students. Every student in our school district has one, that school board members can reach out to those people and contact them directly. And after that discussion, a proposal was made that school board members not be able to do this. Now, before we get with what happened with that vote, it seems to me really strange that the first thing should have been to have a. Well, let me go to this. First of all, it wasn't clear who this was or what had happened. And school board member Theriault pointed out that he actually had contacted students directly in the school system, but that was in his role as the chairman of the subcommittee on student involvement. This idea of having some student members be represented on the board, and but he had been given the emails of the 4 or 5 or whatever number it was of students who had been chosen for that purpose, and so as chairman of the subcommittee, he had. From the emails he'd been given, he'd sent an email out which he said he'd be happy to share to these students, saying, informing them of what was happening next with regard to that committee. After a little more time had passed, school board member at large, Rich Gerard, put his hand up and said, "It's actually I am the one that people have been referring to," which I thought was a strange way of putting it. But in any case. He said, he told the members of the board and the public that he had contacted a student because the student had written an article in the Little Green newspaper from Central High School regarding the teacher's contract and had expressed an opinion about that. So he had decided to take it on himself to find this young lady's email address and to send her information, in his words, information correcting her incorrect statements or something. Now, time out right there, because at its face it seems to me very plain that it's I don't know why people find this complicated. I think it's clearly troubling and, as somebody said, creepy. I find it troubling that a school board member would make the decision to find a student's email address and then, without contacting the superintendent, the school board chairman, the mayor, anybody, the principal of the school, the advisor to the Little Green newspaper, nothing. He took it upon himself as an individual school board member to send from his school board address, to send an email to a student telling her that she was incorrect, etc., etc. at its face, it seems to me that this is well, as a very minimum, I would call it poor judgment. I think it's a simple decision for a school board to decide that. I think, frankly, that a school board should have passed a motion of disapproval of that action. It was disturbing and disappointing to me that a discussion ensued on this topic, and the member at large, school board member Gerard, didn't apologise or whatever. He maintained that what he had done was appropriate, and etc. What disappointed me the most was that when the motion was made by school board member Scannell to change that, which I thought was very, very mild, this idea that there would be a proposal that the IT department look into removing the ability of school board members to be able to contact students directly. It was pointed out, I think by Mr. Gerard, that no such motion could be taken by the school board because it was under any new business. And under any new business, and under Robert's rules, the rules under which the committee operates, that it wasn't allowable to have a motion put before, proposed, seconded, and adopted. And so what would need to happen is that they would have to suspend the rules in order for such a motion to be taken. Now remember, the motion wasn't to say, school board member Gerard, you did a wrong thing and we disapprove of it. The resolution was only that the district administration look into how they might ensure that school board members no longer had access to the emails of children in the school district. On the procedural vote, which was to suspend the rules so that that mild vote could be taken, can you believe that of our 15 friends around that table, that the majority of them voted no? It just, what does one have to do in the city of Manchester? Where are the standards in the city of Manchester? I can tell you, if it was my student or my child, and a school board member reached out to them to criticise them or to correct them, whatever set of words he wants to use for what it. I haven't seen that which he sent. I don't care to. I don't care about it. I'm not interested in discussing the niceties of all of this. I'm interested in just the simple fact: is it or is it not right for a school board member to search through a database to find the email of a student in the city of Manchester and then send them emails? I think it's entirely inappropriate, or an email or emails. I further have to say that in the days since this has happened, I think obviously school board member Gerard has, but this he has taken to, I haven't seen it, but I'm told that he discussed this topic on his television show this past week and had it live on Facebook while doing so. I know that because I saw it myself. I know that the mother of the girl involved sent a very short message on social media saying, two sentences. One was, please remove all reference and mention of my daughter, and I'm not interested in having a debate on this. I would have thought that was enough when a mother says, leave my kid alone and stop talking about her. You're a school board member. You're a grown man. Start acting like it. You would think that a mother saying, leave my kid alone, and remove her name and remove reference to her would have been enough to make this school board member stop. I was appalled to see the conversation continue, and I saw Mr. Gerard's spiel about how I'm going to defend myself against vile accusations or something. I don't know anything about vile accusations. I think there's a lot of noise now going on about this, and why people dislike other people, and who's got vendettas, and why people brought stuff up and all the rest of it. Just on that regard, just the people on social media who were saying that school board members were going after Mr. Gerard, that's entirely incorrect. The way the meeting fell out, the only way that anybody would have known that this was Rich Gerard who had sent an email to a student in the school system was because he brought it up himself and said, I am the one who sent it, and I did send an email. No other school board member said, Mr. Gerard, you did this or you did that. So that's all a fallacy out there arguing about how people went after. It's a very simple thing, ladies and gentlemen. As parents or grandparents or uncles and aunts of children in the Manchester school system, do you or do you not agree that a school board member should be allowed to contact, using the school system's emails, should be allowed to contact an individual student? I think it's very simple. I think the answer is no. The fact that this young girl happens to be a senior, I think, at Central High School, the fact that she's a senior and not a junior, a senior and not a freshman, a senior and not an 8th grader, a senior and not a 6th grader, a senior and not a 3rd grader, none of it matters to me. I think it's very simple. If we're going to start dividing out, well, some school board members who want to take upon themselves this action of, going in and correcting individual kids, that they be allowed to send emails to individual children. What do you think would happen if a school board member sent an email criticising a 2nd grader or a 4th grader? Is that wrong or right? I think clearly anybody who's rational would say that's completely inappropriate. Completely. So, okay, well then, should a school board member send an email to a 6th grader? Or maybe a big 6th grader. Maybe he's a football playing 6th grader. Maybe he's a pretty tough 6th grader. Should a school board member be able to send an email to him? I don't think so. So, okay, a freshman in school. All freshmen and above, school board members, if they don't like what they hear or read from a student in a student newspaper in the city, can step in, not talk to the teacher, not talk to the principal, not talk to the superintendent, but simply step in and send an email to that person. I think it's very plain. The answer would be, this is a creepy thing to do. I love that word because it is creepy, weird, and incorrect, and it shouldn't be allowed. And I don't know why we're having a debate. To me, it would be a simple thing. Is it the end of the world and the whole city should stop and we should have whatever firewalls go up everywhere, or children are no, none of that. I'm not. I'm annoyed at the fact that our school board and our body politic is so dysfunctional that in a simple matter where a school board member, in my view, steps over the line and sends an email to an individual student unsolicited, where he has to seek out her email. So who else's emails might he seek out for whatever reason? What might the next school board member do? It should be a simple matter. It shouldn't have happened. An apology should have been made, should still be made. And then appallingly, when a parent of a student in the district asks a school board member to stop with the social media, he's now taken it to social media, where I've seen him talk about this topic on Facebook. He's had it on a television show that he runs on this station, and he's discussed it at a school board meeting. So now the girl is identified and known and named, and the parent says stop, and you won't stop. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a little waking up to do here in this city. There's a lot of stuff has gone down over time, and these things, this is like the frog in the warm water. You wake up one day and the water's not warm anymore; it's boiling. So I'm really annoyed at the other members of the school board that they couldn't see this for what it is and have a simple, not a wrecking ball. Let's just call it what it is. Take a vote. If I'd been on the school board that night, I would have made a proposal to inform school board member at large Gerard that what he had done was against the wishes of the board and was not approved by the board. I've asked for a seconder, and we would have taken that vote. And then whatever consequence might happen if you decide to do it again, that will be left to itself. But that's where we find ourselves. Let's go back and spend our last 30 seconds or so, as we have here, preparing for Thanksgiving. We all ought to be thankful. We're thankful for a successful year in the city of Manchester. We're thankful for the ongoing safety and well-being of our students. We're thankful that we have, despite all our challenges, that we have kids going to school safely in a learning environment by teachers, even without their contract, are still in there working every day, are working beyond the hours that they're paid for, that we have a superintendent and parents and a community supporting all those kids. I'm grateful for it. I think we all should be. Have a great weekend, ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Good night now from Jim O'Connell here at Education Matters. Bye-bye.